I'm going to leave it there and move through to our panel discussion. So I'll explore this and more. So I'd love to invite to join us on the panel 3 amazing local regenerative economy leaders. Laura Hamilton O'Hara, CEO of the Living Future Institute of Australia. Lachlan Feggans, Senior Director for Sustainability and Regeneration at Brambles. Along with his wife Nicole, they own and run the Jamboree Mountain Farm. And Georgina Johnson, Regenerative Systems Consultant and Knowledge Broker. I'm going to start with you, Laura, if that's okay. So you work with industry leaders at the forefront of regenerative development. You see lots of exciting best practice around the country. What are some of these best practice approaches that you see when it comes to regenerative development and built environment? Big topic for us here in the Highlands at the moment, Ashbourne, South Barrel. Now, what are some of the opportunities for us here in the Highlands?
Thank you. I am the CEO of an organisation who runs the Living Building Challenge, which is the most stringent sustainability standard in the world. It works on regenerative design principles. And the thing that I love the most about working in this way is that it helps bring the ideas and concepts of regeneration to life in a very tangible way. People can see what this means. We've got projects all around Australia and New Zealand as well. Some of them, in fact, most of them are in regional areas. One of the most Actually, the one that's fully certified is down at Wollongong University, the SBRC, the Sustainable Buildings Research Centre. But there are ones popping up all the time. And I think one that's really significant for this area is to think about is one in Bega. So Bega have set this quite ambitious target, and they're using buildings as a catalyst to achieve this target. And that's to be the leading area for circular economy in Australia by 2030. And they're building the Centre for Circular Economy, and they're using the Living Building Standard for it. And that's because buildings catalyze so many different things, both from a manufacturing. If you just look around this room, just rest your eyes on something. That thing came from somewhere. It came from someone's habitat. Somebody made it. Somebody was paid or not paid to do it. They were either under modern slavery conditions or they were completely fairly treated. That got here somehow. How it got here matters. And if you think of all the things that go into a building is all a way to get things started because of all the people that use it, work on it, both in its kind of design, construction and operations. So Bega's big project is super exciting, but there's quite a lot of council-led projects around the country, including things like in Ku-ring-gai Council. They're doing an environmental education centre, and also in Melbourne, Marybeck has a community centre there as well. So they've mostly used these buildings as a great way to kind of catalyse things. I think there's a huge opportunity in Highlands to do that. Not only is there development happening already, but there are a lot of key people who are experts already in this area. Got a lot of things going for you, including manufacturers who are doing tremendous things. One of the ones that we work with is Barrel Bricks, which is part of the Austral Bricks. And they're here. You've already got manufacturers doing things. So there's a lot of things in your favour, and I certainly sort of encourage, particularly new development, to be thinking about, okay, we're going to build. Let's not build something that's less bad. Instead, let's imagine what does good look like for us.
Not settling for less bad, but actually looking for things that are good. Love it. Lockie, you wear multiple hats. You straddle both global and local. You're doing great things with Jamboree Mountain Farm, really beautiful place that you run with your wife, Nicole. You've also been leading Brambles' transition to a regenerative business, which is at global level. What are the roles for corporates in supporting place-based regeneration and working alongside communities? And how might the Highlands leverage this trend?
Yeah, thanks, Reece. Look, I've been in the sustainability space for a very long time, over 20 years. But it can be a very, very lonely existence. You're always pushing it uphill. So it's actually really encouraging, number one, to have a bit of a crew locally. We've only just met, by the way, so great. But also to have you all here is really energising, and to see that interest from the community. And I think that when you're working in a big business, I work at Brambles. It's a supply chain logistics company, probably the biggest circular business you've never heard of. It's a very boring product, but that product does amazing things, and it moves things around the world, food, drinks, and all those sorts of things that we take for granted. It goes on reusable pallets, all right? So Brambles is an Australian innovation from Newcastle, interestingly, that has started back in the late 1800s and is now in 60 countries, over 60 countries around the world. And it is a circular business because of the reuse model. So we reuse these assets over and over again. And the reason why this is becoming far more interesting for customers and also the investors is that they can see that this circular economy is having a really positive impact on the environment and on society, and they want that supplier to be in their supply chain. So Bega's a really good example. We've had lots of conversations with the Bega brand, all the big retailers, all the big food manufacturers right around the world. They're using a circular business model to move their goods around the supply chain. But also investors. You heard from Reece here as well, the signals that we're getting from the investment community. And I do a lot of engagements with investors. Being at Brambles nearly 9 years, I've seen that investment was probably about 5% when I first started back in 2015. That's gone up to over 25% now of what would be you'd consider to be sustainably focused investors. And that's a spectrum, of course, as Reece mentioned. You've got superannuation funds who have ESG funds, and all the way down to the impact investors who really want to drive change. And they are really pushing for change as well through their capital. They want to know what we're doing on sustainable timber sourcing. They want to know what we're doing on climate. They want to know what we're doing on decarb. In fact, all the things that we saw up here on the screen that are happening in council is pretty much transposed to a corporate sphere as well. And I think that the corporate world, the reason why I'm in that space is because it has actually been the source of most damage. All right, and then if we can change that model, that corporate model, to become more circular, to become more regenerative, then business can be done differently, and it can actually deliver a lot of positive outcomes as opposed to being the real key source of resource consumption and habitat destruction. And I think that the signals that business is actually responding to at the moment are really positive. And I know that a lot of my colleagues and peers across the ASX are doing the same thing. It's hard work. You're not going to see every business doing everything, but we know that we're driving that change, and that change is coming from a lot of different angles. So it's quite an exciting space to be in after 20 plus years. But the other hat that I wear at a farming level is making a change in the food systems. And I'll talk about that maybe a little bit later.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, thank you for your patience, 20 years worth of patience. You got there in the end. Georgie, double barrel one for you. What is a food system knowledge broker? And secondly, on a serious note, you've done a lot of work in helping young people gain access and pathways into the regenerative economy. We know that this is an issue. It's a big issue in Australia. So what are some of the things you've seen work, and what are some of the challenges as well?
I'll start with the knowledge broker. I actually can't take credit for that term. It was my mentor that actually gave me that title. And it was because I was finding myself sitting at the nexus between discussion tables that had small-scale farmers around the world and supply chain logistics companies, all the way through to who is providing the funding and setting up the sort of market frameworks that we were responding to. And they arrived all with what I perceived as the same common goal, but all very different terminologies of how to get there, all very different markers of what success would look like, and all very unwilling to negotiate on the fact that we all actually had the same goal, but we just had different pathways to get there. And what was needed, and it's interesting talking about the difference between the US and Europe, is it's sort of, you say knowledge broker over there and everyone understands. You say it in Australia and people look at you like you've got two heads, which is because they understand systems thinking and they understand holistic perspectives, and how this role of the facilitator and the knowledge broker is really admired over there from paddock to plate. And so what I gained experience in was in ecological settings and in big, large-scale climate restoration programs, was coming at it from a perspective of understanding everything from the soil science all the way through to the markets of sort of pushing our big companies to respond a certain way by choice and by force at the same time. And where I'm sort of at the moment is this really interesting point where in the middle, well, on the one hand, we've got farmers that are really willing to engage. We've got some of the best farms in the world, I'd argue, in this country. And on the other hand, we've got big companies and federal, state and local governments under big pressure to increasingly increase their sustainability commitments and actions. But in the middle, we're a really big country. The supply chain's a massive issue. The infrastructure's a big issue. So it's very easy for England, which is tiny, to say we're going to transport everything based off solar power. Try and do that from the top end down to Victoria or Tasmania. It's a bit of a different story. And the challenge is that we've come into this country with a very much US markets and a European style of thinking, and then come here and gone. And at the same time, we've also done it with a level of funding that's incredibly small compared to what's happening overseas. So there was like a budget of something, I think it was like 700 something million in the latest budget towards ag and food systems. In the US, you're talking billions. And so when you're asking people to respond throughout the supply chain in different ways with such a small amount of capital in a very risk-averse country, it's really hard to convince the younger generation to step in, to say, please become involved in climate and landscapes and, regeneration systems on a whole. We're not going to pay you much. No one's going to understand why you do what you do. No one understands that, eating 3 times a day is really important, and the wool in your jumper and the cotton in your socks and everything really needs to be Australian-based. And we'll always pick the $7 bag of cashews that's been manufactured in China compared to the $32 bag of cashews that actually probably maybe shouldn't be grown in Australia. Please come and join us. No one's going to do that when you can stand there and be a paddle pot person for, 180,000, 7 hours a day staring at a tree. So I sort of have sat across all the different areas, but then at the end of the day, the big passion for me lies in we've got an incredible wealth of knowledge in our current landscape managers, incredible amount of wealth, very different perspectives of how to do things, but we've got a big age gap. Most of them are, 50 to 60 plus, and then we've got a whole younger generation that's wanting to step into this space and a whole generation in the middle that's been told to go off farm and go get a real job. So how do you facilitate that transition from a knowledge perspective, and then how do you make it economically enticing? And that's where it's so exciting to see all these examples of regeneration, because in my head, it has to be profitable. You have to be paid well at the same time as doing something that's purpose-driven. And I think you can have your cake and eat it too, and we can do it. And I think we're ripe in opportunity across this country. It's just about how do we capitalise and how do we make sure that we take the time to really develop pathways and strategies that are holistic in their systems thinking, looking across all 3 horizons and really identifying the levers of change that we can pull to get there.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you. So we have discussed a little bit about the role of corporates. So regenerative enterprises, obviously, a lot of them are grown from the ground up, the bottom up, doing this wonderful work, the heavy lifting in communities. There's also a really important role, obviously, with the reach and procurement power, scale and size of corporates. But there are also some really interesting partnerships happening with corporates as well, one of which is big on our doorstep, relatively speaking. Laura, what can you tell us about this interesting partnership with Bigger Cheese?
Not that much, to be honest. I know a lot about the project. It's been mostly government funded and partly funded by Bigger Cheese. But I think the thing that I can tell you is that they've got this really clear goal. And not only is it clear, it's exciting and it's opportunistic and it's this hopeful vision for the future, which is really helpful to get people on board. It's really helpful to get funding. It's really helpful to kind of get momentum in a community. So I think that's probably why I like regeneration as a concept in general, is because of that very future-focused, hopeful, opportunistic stuff. It's not about, what you need to do less with and kind of deprivation. There's opportunity there. And they've really seized it for their region and kind of interested in sort of showing a leadership position. So good on them. That's what I can say. And they're putting their money where their mouth is. And I can't tell you too much, Reece. I'm under NDA, I would say.
Yeah, sorry, you did actually mention that the other day. I forgot. Sorry. So Bigger Cheese have been instrumental in creating the Bigger Circularity Valley, which is exploring how the whole of the Bigger region can become circular. The economic opportunity, with also the opportunity to really become experts in a circular economy, which involves not just the business, but also the community as participating stakeholders in this process as well. Obviously, council played a really important role. Does anyone else on the panel have anything to share about Bigger Cheese? It's an interesting one.
They are doing some interesting stuff with their farmers at the moment, because obviously milkgate prices is a nice hot topic, and dairy and beef cattle aren't necessarily viewed in the most positive perspective at the moment by the general public when it comes to climate, and I would argue that's the communication strategy that's been put out, not necessarily the fact. I watched their CFO give a presentation on sustainability the other day at Agribusiness Australia conference, and it was the top 150 companies about how they were addressing climate change. He actually got up and spoke about sustainable finance rather than sustainable practice, which I thought was an interesting divergence from the topic, and said a lot. But at the same time, they completely acknowledged that as a big company, they've got a massive role to play in terms of landscape management and bigger, and what that looks like for the community in 15, 20, 25 years, and when it comes to actually how majority of the landscapes are being managed, which is a lot of dairy farms in the area. So there's some positives there, but definitely room for improvement.
I might just add quickly, we spoke to Bigger when they were just kicking this project off, and one of the things I asked them was that you've got a very big dairy industry. There's a lot of external fertilizers and herbicides that are used in that space. How does that affect the water systems? How does that affect the habitat and the ecology? And the response was that they have to have it in a way, and I don't think they've achieved it just yet, but I'd say that they're working towards this because right down at the mouth of the river. What is it? The Chiros River? No, it's somewhere. They have oyster farms down there, and they need to have that water in incredibly good quality flowing through there. So if they have a huge amounts of pollutants coming running off the farms, which is very typical. You used to look at New Zealand as to how bad it is over there. That's going to affect the oyster farms and the food system in that region. So they've been able to bring those groups together so they can actually have clean water flowing through their water systems and actually produce healthy food as well. So I think that there's probably still a long way to go, but I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. It was on the ABC recently, wasn't it? So you can see what they're doing. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to open it up for questions in a minute, but as I do that, I'm going to invite you to become participants in this conversation. So if you've got any questions, please put your hand up. This QR code will take you to just a short survey with a list of some options that we might want to explore in the Highlands. It's a QR code. If you scroll in on your phone, if you zoom in, you should be able to do it. You shouldn't have to sort of physically move. So it's just going to give us a sense of where the energy is in this room, like where, if the council was going to prioritise, if we were going to prioritise, if WinZero were going to prioritise something, what might it be? What's exciting you about this space? The other thing I'll say is that in October, we're going to be hosting another follow-up session. It's going to be a little bit more detailed than this one. It's going to be a workshop, co-design. So if you are interested in becoming more involved in a co-design way, please do sign up outside after this event. Before we move to audience questions, I'm just going to ask you, Lockie. So as a local farmer, you've been involved in some innovative circular economy solutions. So I'm interested and I'm curious, what are you experimenting with and how might we support this? So there's lots of farmers doing innovative work. We've got Phil in the room as well. I've had some really great chats with Phil at Moonacres doing really amazing things. How can we be supporting the regenerative entrepreneurs at a regional level who are experimenting with these innovative solutions?
Yeah, thanks, Reece. So the other hat I wear is a farmer. We're on 100 acres in Robertson. We have a regenerative farm. It's an egg farm, so we're probably about 1,500 chickens at the moment and also cattle. And we move those around the pasture on a really regular basis, probably twice a week. And we use the animals as a tool to move fertility around the pasture. And we're building the soil, regenerating the pasture, and also producing amazingly healthy, nutritionally dense food, which you can get at Moonacres. So we've had the fantastic support of Phil and the team at Moonacres since we kicked off, and it's been a really encouraging thing to have. One of the inputs we have is we have to feed the chickens grain. Okay, that's just, there's no way around that. They do get some food, grubs and bugs from the pasture because they are literally on the grass and enjoying themselves and being an actual chicken, but we have to feed them grain. Of course, there's a huge impact of the grain production system. One of my colleagues, I actually encouraged him to go into this role because I thought this business was so cool. She's a woman called Olympia Jaeger down in Canberra, and she's developed an innovative technology to turn food waste into protein meal for the agricultural sector. Again, I think she's been featured on quite a few programs. Essentially, what they've been able to do is get a whole huge amount of food waste from supermarkets, and now they've actually got one of the biggest hotel chains on their books now, and they feed it to black soldier flies. And the black soldier flies lay their food, and the larvae hatch and devour the food, and then they have a very short life because they get killed by very hot water. But it is an incredibly protein-rich larvae that is actually, it comes out as a result of that. It's about 40% protein, has an amazing array of fats and oils, really, really healthy stuff. And we've been introducing this to the chickens in chicken feed. And it's what we've noticed, especially over this period where we just came out of that rainy period, and being a farmer, you are on the front line of climate. Phil and I share war stories about how muddy it always is in Robertson. But we've just come out of this rainy section. It's not good weather. We've got these birds, these new birds that are just coming on to lay. And what we've been able to do is maintain a really strong level of egg production through rainy, windy and cold weather, which is not normally the case. So it's helped our production. It's made the eggshells stronger. And because of the nutritional density of this addition, which is probably only about 5% in their food mix, we're getting that nutrient back into the soil. It's going onto the farm and it's cycling that nutrient. So wherever that food waste came from, be it a Woolworths or the hotel chain, is now actually being regenerated back into the soil on our farm. So we wanted to support this business and help them grow because we think it's a fantastic thing. Amazing products they're producing. Another thing they do is maggot poo, which they call frass, and it's a soil conditioner that helps soil. It's basically a fertilizer replacement as well. So we're experimenting with these really innovative circular products, especially in the food system, because it's really hard to do circularity in the food system. And we want this business to succeed, so we're supporting them and integrating that into our system. It's quite a funny scenario. Having the larvae dead already is extremely convenient to feed that to the chickens. And we've had a new batch of chickens as well, which we've discovered are addicted to this stuff and are nuts. And they'll see my wife driving over the hill in the UTV and they just swarm against the netting. And so we protect these chickens with electric netting for the foxes. So much weight has come forward, they snap the fence and they just get out and they run over. And anyway, so we've had to mix it in with their feed so it's not so obvious. But stronger eggs, better food, it's something that we want to continue with. But, we're very small scale. What we want to do, and to Reece's point, is we want to share this information with other egg producers so that the business can be successful. And they're based in Canberra, but they have modules. They've got one in the bottom of the Hyatt, I think, in Sydney, and they're able to actually get all the Hyatt food waste, convert it on site, and then the larvae get sent to another egg farm, which I just connected with recently called it's Hilltop Farm or something. I don't know them. They're much bigger than us, about 40,000 birds. And then they feed it to the chickens and then the Hyatt buy the eggs back. So it's this really fantastic circular system that makes a lot of sense and has already been proven. Well, we're trying to do it here in Robertson in the Highlands and do a smaller model, but we do know a lot of other egg producers in Kangaroo Valley and out at Exeter that we want to encourage to use this product as well. And it's just one of those things that is achievable because it's been done before, it's proven, it's not that experimental anymore. And we know that, addressing food waste emissions is one of the quickest ways we can bring down emissions of the region.
Laura, you're connected with lots of regional areas, communities that are involved in development. Would you like to respond?
To a degree, what I would say is I suppose our standard is specific around where you can and can't build. So the first question we always ask is, should you build here? And there are lots of reasons why you wouldn't. Some of them are really things just like flooding zones or bushfire, vulnerable, or maybe it's old growth forest or things like that. You absolutely, according to our standard, cannot build there. So I think the way that we advocate is especially with the tier 1 developers, is starting with that question, should you even build there? And let me tell you, it's a controversial question to go in with. But new development does need to happen, but there are also a lot of existing sites that can be used or reused or repurposed, existing buildings that can be repurposed. There are plenty, thousands out there that something can be done with. So development's not always new development. I think we should really seriously consider what we can do with the existing building stock as well.
And Georgie, I know you are interested in other land uses in development as well, particularly around integrating food systems. Was there anything you'd like to share in terms of best practice?
In more metropolitan, let's go there. I think it's definitely shifting. I just don't think there's vocal enough. Silently, a lot of councils at the moment are actually buying up green blocks. So they're actually buying houses, knocking them down and turning them back into vegetative states. There's a lot of really interesting, we're talking about sustainability and regeneration. And I agree with you. I can't stand that word sustainable because why would you want to sustain something? It makes no sense. But what is coming down the track hard and fast, which I don't think we've really got our eyes open to, is the whole biodiversity argument. But people are paying attention more in metropolitan settings because of things like heat and how water is being moved across landscapes. So there's lots of actually interesting projects taking place in the main cities, such as biodiversity corridors and pollinator corridors that refreshingly aren't actually being funded by state and community funding. They're being funded by philanthropy and that sort of stuff because they want to bring green urban spaces into the city. And I think this is a really powerful tool. I always use the analogy of a zoo. You don't really care about the elephant until you go to the zoo and you see the elephant and you have an emotional connection with it. It's the same with regional and metropolitan landscapes. People don't really understand regional communities because metropolitan areas have been designed in a way that we are so disconnected from landscapes. But if you look at a fantastic city that I was lucky enough to live in and addicted to, Vancouver, really boring and mundane jobs like land planning, taxation and stuff have actually been really powerful tools in ensuring that within 20 minutes of the city you hit land, you hit dairy farms. So there's a reason why in Canada they don't import any dairy because they're so protective of their dairy farmers. So when we're talking about bringing in green and urban landscapes into metropolitan settings so that people can reestablish a connection with nature, I think it's incredibly powerful. And unfortunately, metropolitan settings are being forced to diversify and bring in more biodiversity because of issues like heat. But the good thing for more regional communities and landscape managers is it's very much a tool of reestablishing that connection for a big population and an increasing population that doesn't understand anything about ecosystems. So I think it's happening. I just don't think it's spoken about enough.
Interesting. Thank you. Does anybody have any thoughts about Argyle Street in Mossvale? So I've been here about 10 years and it's a very weird sort of strip shop, strip line of shops, that's the technical term, that has grown in a really weird way. But I've always thought that it would be fabulous to have some semi-high-rise in there and get some people living in among the shops. Does anybody have a view of that in terms of Regen? We would miss out on a huge opportunity with the pub that Woolworths wanted. Of course, we need another supermarket. But yeah, does anybody have a view on that?
So, interesting alternatives in urban development. Anyone? It is not my area of expertise.
I can talk a little bit to what Newcastle did, but it isn't high-rises over shops or increasing the density. But one of the things that happened in Newcastle was that they had a central business district that people started moving out of, and it became sort of this real dead zone. And they wanted to revive that. And what the council did, I think, was incredibly innovative, is that they almost sort of created this pop-up culture where they charged very little rent, and they got a succession of lots of really interesting and different shops happening in that area. And then people came back because there was stuff going on. And then actually, unfortunately, eventually it became so popular they were able to charge normal rent, and then the pop-up shops had to go. But for a while there was this really lovely social enterprise pop-up shops that really regenerated that whole area.
We might need to wrap it up in a minute. What I do love about the Newcastle example is that they invited in artists and creatives into the centre. And, you know, part of a thriving regenerative economy is a thriving culture. And that's culture from First Australians and culture from practicing artists and creatives. That was a wonderful example. And, you know, I'd love to see something similar happening in the Highlands, inviting artists into the centre of town. We've probably got time for one more question. If it's a 30-second question, you've got 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
So the Newcastle model was actually implemented in Robertson. You probably don't know that, but we did it in Robertson and we did it on a very small scale. And I think we can all say it worked. And secondly, I used to take food waste from Sydney and bring it to my farm and I would compost it. I was asked to stop doing that by the quarantine people because of Phytophthora. And what I'm really excited about is Lockie's startup with the soldier flies is actually achieving exactly the same aim of moving food waste from Sydney onto your farm without killing the trees. So well done, Lockie.
And you, Phil, to be honest, you know, you're a regenerative pioneer and we're grateful for what you do as well. We're going to have to leave it there, but we are going to be hanging around if you want to have a chat afterwards. I will also say that if this interests you, if you're interested in getting involved, if you're interested in helping to develop a regenerative economy here in the Highlands in any kind of way, then please do sign up outside. The WinZero crew have got a sign-up sheet, and we will be having another gathering in October. As I said, it's a chance for actually to roll up our sleeves and do some thinking and some design work as well. So more information about that, it's likely to be the end of October. We're sending out some information soon.